Hi everyone, my name's Chara Balasubramaniam. I'm the Head of Global Learning, Innovation and Design at Bayer. I'm working in the global part of the business. I've got a couple of colleagues here as well, sitting on the corner, who will help me with the answering questions later. And this talk really is about scenario-based learning to try and tackle the fact that we have such a widespread global workforce that we work in, and how do we cater for all of our needs. And our angle that we use is good storytelling and scenario-based learning, and I'll talk a little bit about that. It ties in a lot to do with Kathy Moore's session that she had yesterday. This is us. This is Bayer. Bayer itself is a company. It's a group of different parts, and totally collectively it's 155,000 employees around the world. It's a massive organization, and I represent the Bayer healthcare arm of the business, which is primarily the pharmaceutical and other parts of the business as well. That in itself is about 55,000 people around the world, the biggest chunk. We, as an industry, I think most of you are aware, it's a very compliance-driven organization, very highly regulated, and there's the problem in terms of how do we move away from this tick box exercise, which we know we have to do, being very heavily monitored and regulated, but how can we get our people to actually learn from this at the same time as well? So a learning academy was set up within Bayer, this is back in 2011, to really tackle the needs of our learners. And I'm not really going to be talking about leadership skills as such and soft skills, but this is more around operational training. What do people need to know to do their jobs effectively every day? The Learning Academy itself is within another function. So imagine Bayer Healthcare. There's another function within it called Global Development. What that means is it's the area of the business that focuses around clinical trials, making sure that what we do ultimately not only is it's something that can save people's lives, but along the way it's something that is done safely and as efficiently, and it's efficacy is a word that comes to mind all the time when we're doing this. So our workforce in general, globally focused, as I mentioned, we have 8,000 employees around the world, 150 different job roles, and all of that based in 50 countries. That's a reality. The reality of what we face is this. And obviously, naturally, you've got lots of different cultures in there, from European cultures to individual country cultures, or all sorts of different aspects to think about. Now, just focusing on one of those countries, so why not, we're in the UK, so why not focus just on the UK, just to give you a bit of demographic information about our workforce. UK as an example, we have 876 employees, making up that overall 55,000 that we've got. The average age is around 43, so we're very heavily skewed. Most of our staff range from 35 upwards to 68, I think you can see there. Talent management is an issue within our organization, so that's something that we're focusing on within our company, and we're no different to a lot of companies, so it's a challenge that we face. How do we bring these millennials on board, and so on and so forth? Our male-female ratio, this is the only bit I'm going to talk about when it comes to male-female, because actually this is a common issue for all of us, and I'm no gender expert when it comes to the learning aspect of it. But we have a 40% male and 60% female ratio in our company in the UK. The only reason I'm highlighting this is that out of all of those 50 countries that we talked about, each one has its own kind of unique spin, some weighed slightly differently to others, and others very similar to ours. And the key point to get across is that we have a very diverse audience, and there hasn't been to date such a one-fits-all kind of approach when it comes to training within our company to date. So our learning design process, and this is us on the left-hand side, you'd see us, we're this kind of company with a multi-generational audience, got a lot of people, which I've just gone through. What do we do when someone comes in and says, look, I need to train people on a particular topic, how do we do this? Well, we've adopted the actual ADDIE model, which I think most people are familiar with. We're actually moving over to a little bit of an iterative model called the successive approximation model, which is something that we're trialing, but these are just instructional design processes. So I'm going to try and tell the story from the ADDIE aspect, starting with analysis. What do we do? From the analysis phase, one of the key things that we do is we established a team of subject matter experts, and our learning consultants are here in the audience as well. And we sit down with the subject matter experts who represent different stakeholders in the business and really work out, this will probably be very familiar to most of you, Bloom's taxonomy. It's something that's been around for lots of years, Benjamin Bloom's kind of model. We've tried to take our own, what we can from it, and we classify our learning outcomes into 4 different levels. The first of which is actually that information exchange level. So that's the level where you need to give information to your learner. So how do you do that? And that then determines how you design your actual module or event. The next one is actually how do you need to get them to recall some of what you've taught them, some of what you've got across to them. So how can you design your learning to try and fit that level? Apply obviously is an important one in your job. When you're in your job and you've gone through all this training on the knowledge, information exchange and recall, how do you build upon that? How can you take that into your everyday job and apply it? And then moving on furthermore is actually where there's a major return on investment, return on benefit, effectiveness. And that's where the benefits are to the organization, is how can our learners evaluate and critique what they've done to be able to change the way that we do things anyway in our business. I'm not going to spend more time on this because I'm going to come back to this a bit later on. So scenarios for your audience, and I think this is key. Kathy Moore would have talked a lot about this before, but we are going to kind of talk about 3 different styles of scenarios to try and meet some of those learning needs. The first one is that kind of linear, we call it a passive linear scenario. So this is where you have a start point, and that start point is a work situation that you might be faced with. And then you have an end point. Along the way, there's a story being told. There are milestones that you have to go through to reach that ultimate goal. And you can dress that up as you wish. You can have some form of text, you can have media, you can have audio, you can have video, whatever it be, but that story is a linear story. We're great at that in our industry, by the way. I don't know, is anyone else from a kind of compliance sector, whether it be pharma or finance or anything like that? But I think, to be honest, the truth is it applies to most areas. We're really good at telling the right way of doing things. And it's in our makeup. We operate by standard operating procedures. That's the way that our mentality is. However, what we try to do is we try to move on from that. And can we create scenarios in a way that they're a little bit more enriched? You still have your start point, and you still have your end point, and you still have those milestones, but along the way, you get the learners to do things. You get them to answer questions relating to that scenario, how you would do things, and what you would do. In that first example, you've got 2 options. One's correct and one's incorrect. And that's good. That's a good start. It gives them some feedback in a very safe environment, but it takes them back down to that critical path, that yellow brick road, if you will. And the problem with that is it's good, but it's not very realistic when it comes to actually what people do and people are faced with in real life. This is where our branching type of scenario comes in. So this is where it's a little bit more akin to what we face in reality, which is you've got your start point, you've got your scenario, and depending on what option you take, you have a different consequence, you have a different endpoint. And that is a great, safe environment. Personally, I think, also speaking for the group, it's in a very safe, online controlled environment where the learner can get to the end, make a mistake, and then go back and trial it again and go forward with that. One point though, and this is the connect between that multi-generational audience, and I think the key thing here is that if you get that story right, whether it be a linear story, whether it be a branch story, and it mimics the reality of a work situation, it will cut across to all of your audiences. It will cut across generations. It will cut across cultures, because that's what you face. You're in that kind of scenario, and that's what you face. How you want to, I used the term dress it up earlier. I hope that kind of makes sense. But how you tailor that and how you build upon that, whether it be a very video-based approach or a text-based, a really good story, or whether it be some kind of 3D world that you do, that is very much dependent on your cohort and the people that you're working with within your audience. But that story is the important thing to get right, at least from our experience. This is our formulas of how we match up our learning outcome levels to our scenarios. And this has been based on a few years of experience, but also it's something that we're constantly evolving. So by no means is it gospel. We think that at an information exchange level, if you can put that information into a realistic scenario where you feel that it builds a context around that information, then we feel that it's something that, and we've been proven actually, that something that can is memorable, and it's something that excites the learners. It puts everything into context around an actual real-life story. So that's a place for passive linear scenarios. For recall levels, we feel that actually the recall itself is all about testing. Can you remember, can you recall what you've been taught previously? So we feel that actually having these interactive questions and options along the way, which are scaffolded in many ways, you know, you're not going to go anywhere with that. You're still going down that critical path. We think that's quite a good way of working out whether people have recalled or met that particular learning outcome level. At an apply, naturally, we move on to branching. So branching, a key point here is that this is, we feel you can hit an apply level when you have branching with defined endpoints. So that means that actually you get to the end, as you can see up the top, you can get to the end, it might be the right way of doing it. You can get to the end, to the middle line, and actually that's the incorrect way of doing it. And you get to the end right at the bottom, depending on what path you take, and that might be a bit of a, yeah, you've kind of done it correct, but actually you could do it better. But it allows learners to be able to go back, and it's very structured, you can go back and trial it again. But to actually hit this really kind of top area of evaluate or create and really bring some kind of return on investment to the business is, we feel that actually if you have that kind of branching scenario, but with no clear endpoint, if all of those endpoints, all of those three areas, if they all ended up in a kind of grey area which mimics reality, then actually you're empowered then to work with your learners to really then follow that dialogue beyond that learning module and get their feedback and let them reflect upon what they've done, why they've got to this point. Is there something that they can do better? So we feel that it hits a really high kind of learning outcome level that can then influence our business. I'm not going to go through screenshots. I'm going to try and show you some examples of, these are some screenshots, but I'm not going to go through them. But I'm going to try and, hopefully the technology works, just a short video, a 2-minute video clip around how we're bringing storytelling into scenario-based learning within our area in a kind of blended approach.
We are currently working on a training programme for Bayer staff who are involved in the clinical trials of a new product. The training programme aims to improve knowledge of the new drug and the targeted disease, and will include introductory webinars, web-based training modules and knowledge checks, face-to-face training and an information platform. There are 3 web-based training modules that focus on the disease, from initial symptoms to diagnosis and treatment. The content for these modules could be presented as a series of frames containing text information supported by images and graphics, but we felt there was an opportunity to really engage and motivate the learners by linking the facts to the real experience of a patient undergoing treatment. So, we introduced our virtual patient Susan. Inspired by the video diary of a real patient on YouTube, we came up with a short first-person script to be performed by an actress telling Susan's story in the form of a scenario. We were able to unfold the details of Susan's progressing disease and treatment as seen from the patient's perspective. We also wrote in details about her personal life, like her love of gardening, time spent with friends and family, and how all of this was impacted by the disease. The video will be presented as a series of short sequential clips along a sliding timeline, interspersed with further text and image content relevant to each clip. Visually, the timeline will show snapshots of Susan's life, her garden, her home, visits to her GP and the hospital. This further depicts the character that the learners can relate to and empathise with, while learning via a well-written story in the form of a scenario.
So also, as you can see, at the end, we've got a multiple number of outputs in terms of devices that we use for different audiences, some that are more savvy with technology and some that are less savvy with technology. So my final slide is really to kind of just the take-home message from all of this is that just to go back to that question, does a multi-generational audience matter when it comes to training? Of course it does. I wouldn't even start to be controversial with this because, to be honest, and going back to that start, it's not really a multi-generational issue, I don't think, anymore, certainly not within our company. I think it's a generation does have something to do with it, but I think it's more of a multifaceted issue. And I think by that, obviously your target audience is important. You need to know who this is going out to. And really, some of the discussions that we've had over the last few years has been quite enlightening, because people, when we're in our subject matter experts, with our subject matter experts and our stakeholders, people, especially globally, and globally dispersed people from different cultures, everyone's a little bit sensitive about broaching this generation topic. Everyone's a bit sensitive about how old are your learners, and that's something that has to change. And I think we are going through that period of change within our organization, because until you really know how savvy people are, and I don't mean the younger people are more savvy than the older people. Funny thing is, in our organization, you don't get an iPad or an iPhone until you hit a senior management level. So they're the ones that have got the iPad. They're the ones that are most comfortable with using the iPads and iPhones. So really, one thing it's taught us is just be wary of who you're getting out to, and really not just look at it from a role perspective, but try and understand who your people are. From a locations perspective, naturally, not everyone has great bandwidth connections. In fact, where we're based in the UK, I won't mention, but it's not the greatest there either. And I think that these are all kind of issues that you've got to think about when you're deploying sometimes very high fidelity content, as we talked about earlier. And how can you kind of streamline that? And really good examples from Asi and the team about the HTML5 approach as well. The other key thing that we've learned from this is that just be aware about what can you do yourself. We're really fortunate in our Learning Academy, the way that it's set up. We have our learning consultancy arm that really kind of understands the business, reaches out to the business, performs the action mapping process to really kind of work out what is preventing us from doing things, how can we move on from a business perspective. We then have the Learning Innovation and Design group, which is my group that I head up, who then look at working in collaboration with the learning consultants to see how can we bring this to the right audience at the right level. And then we have our learning management system arm, which we have an internal system that's powered by SuccessFactors, and then who actually implement and deploy all of these systems, all of these resources on different modules, on different devices. And then finally, we have the learning information management arm that can kind of report on, is this working? Are we getting the data that says this is working? What is the return on investment? What is the return on effectiveness, and so on? So sometimes, though, we have to go out to vendors and we have to go out to other companies and we outsource. So it's a mixture of both, but just be aware of what you can do internally. And finally, of course, the learning design point. So that talks back to the different constructs of scenarios. Just pay attention. I think that's one thing that we've learned, is just really pay attention to your target audience, the outcome level that you want them to reach, and how can you design it accordingly with a scenario-based approach. And a kind of final point is that actually it doesn't really matter what type of module or what type of experience that learning module will look like, or that learning event will look like. Ultimately, it's that kind of storytelling that's key, and that getting that scenario right that's key. Thank you.
So, any questions for Chara? Thank you, Chara. No burning questions there? Is this a similar situation to some of you finding yourselves in, or similar challenges?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, if I heard you right, you said it's good to have grey areas and not have finite outcomes every time, which I totally agree with. And I think yesterday it was mentioned that scenarios work really well when there's a question of judgment to be made. But I think you then said that it leads to interesting discussions after the training, and I just wondered how you picked those up, how you managed them. Yeah. Is it a line manager role? Because often there isn't that link between the learning and going into performance and the line manager picking it up. Could you say more about that?
I mean, I can talk about the tools and technology that we use. We have a social networking aspect to our within our company. So what we try and do is try and kind of bridge that gap between formal learning in that module that you do and you get to that grey point, and then being able to reflect back upon that within a shared collaborative space. And then really, it's not just the managers. Often our managers and direct reports aren't the people that work together that often. It's just based on working in a global team, in a matrix organization. It's rarely is that the case. So this is a way that when we have our kind of subject matter experts that pull together around a topic, they monitor and they facilitate those kinds of social collaborative environment sessions to pick up on what are the things that are coming out as grey that we can improve on, to then bring that back into some kind of continuous improvement cycle that we can then feed back to the business.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah, there's one down the back there.
Thank you. Before you implemented all of these tools into your business, did you just drop them all in at once, or was it kind of drip fed to kind of get people used to them? Because we're having a problem where we've got people that use their iPads to work. Yes, sorry. They use their iPads to work. They use their mobile phones, but then they don't use them for anything other than their calendar. So it saves them taking their laptop to a meeting. They take their iPad with their calendar, but you could do so much more. But then they're too afraid, or they're just not interested, or that's what the impression I'm getting from them.
Yeah, I think it's been a piecemeal approach, really. We've only been set up since 2011, and we've kind of formed a team from various different parts of the industry, not just in pharmaceuticals. So we've kind of got together and tackled this, and only now are we kind of uncovering how we can go forward. So it's been a kind of a piecemeal approach. Within that, we've had so many other issues. We have a standard default browser of IE8, believe it or not. So to try and do, for those that are close to mobile learning in HTML5, it's just forget about it. So that's changing, luckily, as all of these things do. So we've had to kind of evolve ourselves along the way. So another key thing for us is we no longer do any Flash development at all. We used to before, and we've now moved to all HTML and HTML5, CSS, jQuery, and so on. But that's the technical part. In terms of kind of implementing these things in piecemeal, we look at our audience. We look at the different people that make up our audience. You might have spotted in one of those slides, we had a machine, a picture of an Oculus Rift machine, which is this virtual reality headset. And we think that there's potential there with a particular target group, which is of a web-savvy nature, and we think that there's an opportunity to actually form more of a blended environment in face-to-face training. The topic is mechanism of action of a particular drug and how that works. It's very 3D, it's kind of very biochemistry focused. And there are some great animations that can show you how to do that. You can just click play and get through it. But that's a very passive learning experience. You just press play and get through it. So one of the things that we're working on, and this is trial and error, and we've got fantastic support from our management to try out these things, which is important. We're using it in a face-to-face setting for an event around this particular product. And what we're doing is we're using it to tackle a recall learning outcome level, so that when they're in a particular session, they're able to wear this device, not just watch it like a gimmick, but use hand motion sensors to be able to disaggregate that mode of action and be able to place it in the right order that they should do, thereby hitting and attaining that learning outcome level of recall. How you would do that otherwise, and there are other ways of doing this, but this is something that we think if we get it right the first time, it can potentially be used in the future. As to whether we'll still be using it in a year's time, I don't know. It all depends. So it's kind of to answer your question, it's very much a piecemeal approach as to what works and what doesn't.
You've used the word recall quite a lot, Chara, and I know some of the people here were in Christian Jarrett's session where he talked very specifically about recall being one of the key things in actually being able to learn properly. I'm just wondering, with your chunks of your particular learning, is it done in one chunk, or are they coming back to it, and how often, and what are the gaps for the opportunities to do that recall?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think with it, we try and follow some kind of competency-based program, so that as a newcomer, you're building yourself up from that information exchange to that higher learning outcome level. Whereas some people will come in already at an application level, depending on their experience. So we try and do it in a modular basis so that people can come back and come and pick and choose what is right for them, or be assigned what we think is right for them along the way. Recall is an important point, but just to talk to that other part of that question, I think recall as a simple standalone multiple choice question set, or as a simple standalone quiz, without the context of the scenario, I think that's where the two kind of come together. If you can place it in a realistic scenario and then allow people to be able to test themselves, then I think that's where your added value is.
That's great, thank you. We've got about 5 or so minutes left. I wanted to really just open the questioning up to all our speakers because there are questions in common for them, and there may be specific questions you have for each of them. So any last questions coming up? No? They've stunned them into silence. Okay, well then, once again, thank you very much to Chara, Serena and Asi for and I have been asked to just mention that David Gellis's book, Mindful Work, is being signed at the entrance on this side here, just now, at the end of this session. So if any of you haven't got that book or want to get that book, there's your chance. Enjoy the rest of your day.